Under a bleeding red sunset in March 1975, an empty grey Volkswagen Beetle sat abandoned. It rested quietly along the desolate, tumbleweed-blown stretches of Route 66 in the vast New Mexico desert. The missing driver had strangely left behind all his money, identification papers and perfectly packed clothes. More chillingly, a weathered acoustic guitar still rested totally untouched upon the dusty passenger car seat. For any struggling artist, leaving that precious instrument behind meant abandoning his actual living lifeline. Why would a desperate unknown musician walk into the endless wasteland without taking his very soul? Fast forward to a dimly lit apartment in modern Brooklyn. Heavy rain streaks the glass of a narrow bedroom window. A young collector carefully slides a record from its sleeve. In this city, finding obscure vintage vinyl is a competitive sport. It represents the ultimate flex of refined underground musical taste. The thick cardboard jacket feels incredibly fragile in his careful hands. Dust motes dance in the faint amber glow of the room. He examines the faded cover of an album titled U.F.O. It was pressed decades ago and promptly swallowed by total obscurity. He places the heavy black disc onto a wooden turntable. The mechanical click of the arm echoes in the quiet space. A silver needle drops into the warm grooves of the vinyl. That familiar warm crackle fills the heavy silence of the apartment. A melancholic acoustic guitar begins to weave a profoundly lonely melody. Then comes a voice sounding both beautiful and incredibly tired. It is the voice of a man drowning in his own unfulfilled dreams. The Brooklyn collector closes his eyes and absorbs the haunting atmosphere. But here is where the story gets incredibly interesting. This record was never meant to be a mainstream commercial success. It was an independent pressing funded by a few desperate believers. Only a handful of these original copies survived the passing decades. Modern audiophiles hunt for this specific album with absolute obsessive devotion. They dig through dusty crates in forgotten thrift stores across America. Owning this original pressing grants you immediate respect in indie circles. It is a rare artifact from a forgotten era of music. In places like Williamsburg or Bushwick, this record is a holy grail. People proudly display it on vintage shelves to impress their peers. It signifies a deep appreciation for the lost pioneers of Americana. They adore the raw authenticity that modern digital music completely lacks. The album cover features the artist standing in a desolate landscape. His hollow eyes seem to look past the lens of the camera. The aesthetic perfectly captures the vast isolation of the American West. It is a visual prelude to the terrifying mystery hidden inside. But the real secret is hiding quietly within the second track. Most casual listeners focus purely on the gentle strumming acoustic guitar. They completely miss the sinister undertones lurking beneath the beautiful melody. The true horror only reveals itself when you analyze the poetry. The young man sits on his worn couch and listens closely. He has heard these sad melodies at least 100 times, yet something about the lyrics always makes his skin crawl slightly. The words carry a weight that extends far beyond normal sadness. Now listen carefully to what the singer is actually describing. He sings about driving down a long desert highway completely alone. He mentions strange lights appearing suddenly in the dark western sky. The lyrics describe leaving his family behind for a mysterious journey. The singer contemplates walking away into the vast unknown desert landscape. He asks if anyone will even notice when he finally disappears. Every word sounds less like music and more like a detailed confession. It paints a terrifyingly accurate picture of a man vanishing entirely. The Brooklyn collector stares blankly at the spinning black vinyl record. He realizes the singer is predicting his own exact mysterious fate. Everything described in the song happened in real life years later. The desert highway and the sudden disappearance became chilling historical facts. What happened next will surprise you and haunt your thoughts completely. The artist wrote this eerie track as a simple artistic expression. He never knew it would become the blueprint for his doom. The universe seemingly took his poetic lyrics as a literal request. American pop culture loves a tragic artist who dies too young. But this situation is far darker than a standard Hollywood tragedy. This is an artist who essentially wrote his own missing person report. He pressed it onto vinyl and distributed it to the world. A cold shiver runs down the spine of the young collector. The apartment suddenly feels much colder than it did minutes ago. He looks at the album cover resting gently against the speaker. The face of the forgotten artist stares back from the cardboard. The song fades out into the crackling noise of empty grooves. The turntable needle continues to jump rhythmically in the center circle. It creates a hypnotic and repetitive scratching sound in the dark. The collector realizes he is listening to a genuine sonic ghost. The music stops, but the unsettling message lingers in the air. This album is not merely a collection of vintage folk songs. It is a chilling prophecy locked forever inside a vinyl groove. The man sang his own death into existence before vanishing completely. The man who silently vanished, leaving that haunting voice behind, was named Jim Sullivan. He was a towering, imposing figure in a faded denim jacket and shaggy hair. With a heavy mustache and deeply sorrowful eyes, he looked like a weary traveler. But Jim was just another dreamer chasing the glittering illusion of the American dream. During the late 1960s, he enthusiastically moved his wife and young son to Los Angeles. Like countless millions before him, He came seeking fortune in the ruthless machinery of Hollywood. The sprawling, unforgiving city promised endless opportunities for those bold enough to grasp the shimmering lights. Jim firmly believed his unique blend of folk and country music would conquer the world. He quickly became a familiar fixture in the smoky dive bars of the California coastline. Night after night, he tirelessly hauled his acoustic guitar into crowded venues reeking of stale beer. He possessed a deeply booming baritone voice that commanded the attention of anyone who truly listened. His lyrics carried a profound cinematic quality, painting vivid pictures of restless highways and lonely drifters. Even the elite Hollywood crowd occasionally noticed the raw magnetic power radiating from his humble stage presence. Actors like Harry Dean Stanton frequently attended his gigs, captivated by his authentic musical storytelling. They quickly recognized a genuine working-class poet standing right there in the heart of glamorous Malibu. Jim mingled with television stars and film directors who seemingly adored his gritty Western aesthetic. Yet the brutal reality of the American music industry painted a completely different, darker picture. Record executives remained entirely, stubbornly blind to the extraordinary talent performing right under their noses. They dismissed his rugged style as too unconventional for the polished mainstream radio stations. Despite the celebrity endorsements, nobody offered him the lucrative recording contract he desperately needed. He poured his meager savings into producing his own independent album with absolute creative control. With immense help from prominent session musicians, he finally recorded his masterpiece in a professional studio. The resulting vinyl record was a brilliant, sweeping epic of orchestral folk rock and melancholy. He proudly named this ambitious project after the strange flying saucers hovering in his imagination. But here is exactly where the narrative takes a profoundly interesting and unexpected turn. He pressed the records himself, selling them directly from the trunk of his battered car. He drove relentlessly across the sun-baked concrete of Los Angeles trying to distribute his art. It was a complete failure. The masterpiece he sacrificed absolutely everything for was entirely ignored by the general music-buying public. Copies of the ambitious album sat collecting dust in the damp corners of his cramped apartment. The heavy burden of unfulfilled potential began slowly crushing his previously unwavering artistic spirit. He watched lesser musicians achieve massive stardom while he remained eternally trapped in total obscurity. The vibrant, golden promise of California had gradually transformed into an inescapable, suffocating financial prison. His fragile marriage slowly deteriorated under the immense pressure of unpaid bills and shattered artistic illusions. He started drinking heavily, trying to drown the bitter taste of constant professional rejection. The once optimistic dreamer now looked like a ghost haunting the neon streets of Hollywood. By the bitter winter of 1974, Jim realized his Los Angeles journey was over. He had given the unforgiving city his youth, his brilliant voice, and his best songs. In return, the industry offered him nothing but a profound sense of humiliating defeat. The glittering American dream had proven to be nothing more than a cruel, hollow mirage. He needed to escape the blinding superficiality of the West Coast before it destroyed him. Nashville emerged in his desperate mind as the final remaining sanctuary for a struggling songwriter. Tennessee represented a place where authentic storytellers could still find a welcoming and appreciative audience. He decided to gamble whatever tiny fraction of hope he still possessed on one last journey. The year 1969 birthed a very peculiar piece of American vinyl. Jim Sullivan managed to record his debut album with a deeply mysterious title. He called it U.F.O, tapping into a uniquely terrifying cultural hysteria. Throughout the American Southwest, folks were already glancing nervously at the desert skies. The Roswell incident had left a lingering obsession with extraterrestrial visitations across the nation. A tight circle of Hollywood friends pooled their money for the studio time. They gathered a highly respected group of session musicians to back him up. The production featured lush string arrangements and top-tier Los Angeles studio polish. Yet the sound was detached from the sunny pop dominating the radio. The record felt like a shadowy broadcast echoing from a distant, desolate planet. Listeners who uncover this album today experience a profound sense of creeping unease. It does not play like a conventional piece of commercial folk art. Instead, the vinyl spins like a chillingly prophetic tape left behind on purpose. Many critics now describe the entire project as a sprawling musical suicide note. Every chord progression maps out a doomed journey into absolute nowhere. The title track offers the most unsettling glimpse into his troubled mind. Jim sings about looking up at the sky and spotting something unnatural hovering above. He questions whether the blinding lights belong to the Lord or an alien ship. The lyrics capture a profound isolation synonymous with the vast stretches of Route 66. It was a haunting meditation on vanishing into the cold desert atmosphere. Now listen carefully, because the lyrical connections become deeply disturbing from this point forward. He wrote lines about driving down long highways, with nothing but empty space ahead. He explicitly described leaving his family behind to chase an impossible, glowing illusion. The words perfectly mirrored the exact circumstances of his eventual disappearance years later. He was scripting his own bizarre demise long before it actually happened. Another song details the exhaustion of a wandering, hopelessly broken human soul. The protagonist seems entirely detached from the normal rhythms of waking life. Jim delivered these words in a gritty, weary voice that carried immense sorrow. He sounded like a man who had already accepted a terrible, inescapable fate. The music swallows his vocals in a way that feels almost suffocating and claustrophobic. We must understand the intense grip of alien folklore on the American psyche. Down in the southwestern deserts, tales of sudden abductions were practically regional religion. The empty landscapes of New Mexico provided perfect canvases for these late-night nightmares. Jim wove this specific regional paranoia directly into the core of his songwriting. He transformed a cheap sci-fi trope into a devastating metaphor for human loneliness. The instrumentation actively works against the terrifying implications of the written words. Beautifully orchestrated strings sweep across the tracks with a lush cinematic grace. But beneath that polished surface, a deeply unsettling psychological unraveling is taking place. The contrast creates a listening experience that feels both mesmerizing and totally horrifying. You are hearing a brilliant mind casually planning a trip into the unknown void. What did Jim really mean when he sang about those blinding highway lights? Was he romanticizing the escape from his crippling failures in the music industry, or was he genuinely harboring a delusion about being taken by cosmic forces? These questions haunt every person who drops a needle onto this rare record. The cipher remains locked because the man holding the key simply evaporated. Decades later, devoted fans still comb through these tracks with obsessive dedication. They isolate specific verses hoping to find a hidden geographical coordinate or logical explanation. Every casual mention of a dusty road suddenly carries the weight of a forensic clue. Yet the album stubbornly refuses to yield any concrete answers for the desperate investigators. It only offers a melancholic reflection of a deeply tired and broken man. Despite the undeniable artistic brilliance captured within the grooves, the album utterly failed. The record label crumbled quickly, and the pressing plants stopped producing copies entirely. U.F.O. sank into total obscurity without making a single dent on the charts. This brutal commercial rejection shattered whatever fragile hope Jim still held on to tightly. The prophetic lyrics were slowly becoming a grim reality he could no longer avoid. The failure of this cipher transformed his metaphorical highway into a literal road. The blinding lights he sang about were no longer just poetic studio concepts. They waited for him somewhere in the suffocating darkness of the New Mexico desert. He had written the map, pressed it to vinyl, and played it for deaf ears. All that remained was for him to get in the car and drive away. By early 1975, the crushing weight of Los Angeles had finally shattered his lingering hopes completely. He gathered his meager savings and made a desperate gamble to chase a rapidly fading dream. Leaving his devoted wife and young son behind in California felt like tearing his own heart into tiny pieces. He promised them he would finally find immense success in the music business and send for them very soon. Nashville represented the absolute holy grail for any struggling working-class musician during that highly competitive specific era. The neon lights of Tennessee offered one final sanctuary for outcasts who were repeatedly rejected by brutal Hollywood. He packed his trusty grey Volkswagen Beetle with a few essential clothes and his beloved acoustic guitar. The engine sputtered to life as he drove eastward away from the golden California coastline forever. For a broken man running out of time, the open American highway often feels like a heavy confession. The sprawling interstates promised absolute freedom, while simultaneously isolating drivers within their own dark and intrusive thoughts. But here is exactly where the story takes a deeply interesting and completely unexpected dark turn. The endless stretch of sun-baked asphalt quickly transformed from a pathway of hope into something deeply sinister and entirely unpredictable. Driving entirely alone across the vast southwestern desert forces a person to confront their deepest and darkest life failures. The car radio static crackled constantly between distant stations playing upbeat country hits that heavily mocked his reality. He drove continuously through the barren landscapes of Arizona, fueled by cheap roadside diner coffee and sheer desperation. Each passing mile marker pulled him significantly further away from the safety of his broken family. The overwhelming physical exhaustion eventually forced him to pull off the desolate interstate near a small remote town. Santa Rosa emerged like a dusty mirage against the unforgiving emptiness of the sprawling New Mexico terrain. He checked into the La Mesa Motel, seeking a brief respite from the grueling and incredibly lonely cross-country journey. The cheap room offered only a sagging bed and a flickering bulb against the suffocating darkness. The next afternoon, he visited a local convenience store to purchase a bottle of cheap liquor. Local witnesses later recalled seeing a tall, rugged man looking incredibly weary and entirely lost in his swirling thoughts. The store clerk noticed absolutely nothing particularly alarming about the quiet stranger buying alcohol that specific day. He simply paid for his drink and walked back out into the blistering desert heat completely alone. He climbed back inside the cramped Volkswagen and steered it away from the relatively safe motel parking lot. The dusty, unmarked road stretched out endlessly before him, waiting to swallow the tiny vehicle into its massive vastness. He drove away from the main highway traffic and headed toward an isolated local ranching area nearby. The desolate landscape silently prepared to consume him completely without leaving a single visible trace behind. He parked his dusty car on a remote dirt road surrounded by nothing but dry tumbleweeds and endless sand. The heavy, suffocating silence of the desert immediately replaced the constant loud hum of the struggling vehicle engine. He slowly stepped out of the driver's seat into the fading afternoon light with a heavy sigh. There was no turning back. The bleak reality of March 1975 hits harder than any cursed vinyl record. Jim Sullivan drives his grey Volkswagen Beetle down the endless stretch of Route 66. The lonely highway cuts straight through the barren heart of rural New Mexico. Small-town police officers usually deal with speeding trucks and tired tourists. But a highway patrolman in Santa Rosa notices something entirely different that afternoon. He pulls over a dusty car weaving erratically across the empty desert lanes. The officer approaches the window and finds a deeply exhausted musician inside. Jim looks completely disoriented and dangerously fatigued from his grueling cross-country journey. The cop sternly advises the weary driver to find a local motel immediately. Official police records show that Jim actually follows this sensible local advice. He checks into the isolated La Mesa motel situated along the crumbling highway. He pays for the cheap room using his dwindling stash of physical cash. Now listen carefully to the strange sequence of events that follows next. Jim purchases some cheap vodka at a nearby roadside convenience store shortly after. He then leaves the sterile motel room without ever touching the stiff bed. The motel key is later found resting untouched on the cheap Formica dresser. The heavy door remains securely locked from the outside by the departing guest. Jim gets back into his car and drives further down the desolate highway. He travels roughly 20 miles away from the fragile safety of Santa Rosa. The battered Volkswagen eventually stops near a remote ranch completely surrounded by nothing. A local family reports seeing a lone figure wandering aimlessly across their property. The rancher watches the strange man walk away from the parked grey vehicle. The mysterious figure slowly disappears into the vast and unforgiving American desert landscape. This fleeting moment marks the absolute final verified sighting of the struggling musician. The local police officially discover the abandoned vehicle sitting perfectly still days later. The grey metal gleams under the harsh and unforgiving New Mexico desert sun. The doors remain completely unlocked while the windows are rolled down entirely. Investigators begin documenting the bizarre scene, like a standard small-town crime investigation. They expect to find a vehicle completely stripped of its valuable internal possessions. They assume a passing drifter simply robbed the stranded driver on the highway. But the real secret is what the Santa Rosa police actually find inside. The missing man leaves behind his leather wallet packed with unspent paper money. His personal identification papers sit neatly inside the open glove compartment of the car. A pile of clean clothes rests quietly on the faded back passenger seat. His unfinished bottle of cheap vodka sits waiting patiently on the dusty floorboards. None of his essential survival items are missing from the small metal cabin. Everything points away from a violent robbery or a random highway carjacking incident. Criminals never leave behind physical cash and clear identification during a violent crime. The bizarre evidence suggests he intentionally walked away from his entire physical life. However, this popular theory instantly shatters when officers inspect the front passenger seat. A beautiful custom acoustic guitar lies there completely untouched by the harsh elements. The instrument represents the entire beating heart and soul of the vanished artist. A working musician never voluntarily abandons his expensive instrument in an unlocked vehicle. Jim was driving toward Nashville specifically to build a new career using it. The guitar is the one specific item he would definitely take with him. Leaving the beloved instrument behind totally destroys any logical theory of intentional disappearance. A man seeking a fresh start does not discard his only professional tool. The abandoned guitar transforms a simple missing person case into an impossible puzzle. Why would a desperate musician leave his precious guitar to melt in the sun? Did something terrifying lure him away from the car before he could grab it? The vast desert landscape swallows the hidden answers completely without leaving a single trace. Local authorities search the barren area for several exhausting weeks. They find absolutely nothing but empty sand and harsh, unforgiving desert wind. The local authorities immediately launched a massive search operation across the barren New Mexico wasteland. Desperate rescue parties meticulously combed through the unforgiving terrain, looking for the missing musician. The 1970s tracking teams utilized trained dogs and helicopters under the blistering sun. They fully expected to find a wandering man exhausted by the relentless desert heat. Yet the vast expanse of the brutal landscape yielded absolutely no clues about his fate. The sheer terrifying scale of the southwestern landscape makes any rescue mission feel completely hopeless. The endless fields of rolling tumbleweeds can easily hide 1,000 devastating secrets forever. It was as if the dusty earth had simply opened up and swallowed him whole. Frustrated investigators painstakingly retraced his exact steps from the isolated motel back to his car. They found absolutely nothing but long empty stretches of cracked asphalt and whispering dry desert winds. The most logical working theory suggested he drunkenly wandered into the wilderness and finally succumbed. The freezing night climate could easily claim a disoriented man wearing only a denim jacket. But seasoned desert trackers found this mundane explanation incredibly difficult to accept without physical evidence. Vultures and brutal weather might scatter remains, but they rarely erase a human being completely. Not a single fractured bone or shredded piece of clothing was ever recovered from the sand. Darker whispers of violent foul play quickly began circulating around the isolated roadside establishments. Some locals speculated that unsavory criminals had quietly disposed of the vulnerable traveling stranger. Others pointed nervous fingers at the intimidating local law enforcement of rural Santa Rosa. But what the police discovered next completely destroys the logic of a typical highway murder. A desperate killer would have certainly stolen the valuable acoustic guitar sitting right there. A financially motivated criminal would never leave a wallet full of cash resting untouched. The untampered personal belongings strongly suggested that robbery was never the primary motive here. If someone truly wanted Jim dead, why leave all his precious identification behind? This glaring lack of evidence naturally birthed the most sensational and enduring theory of all. Did the strange glowing lights he sang about actually descend upon Route 66 that night? It is a beautifully poetic narrative perfectly suited for the UFO obsession of the decade. People desperately preferred a supernatural alien abduction over the agonizing reality of an unsolved disappearance. However, treating his haunting masterpiece as a literal map only leads us further into the dark. Every single rational explanation inevitably leads frustrated investigators right back into a dark dead end. The chilling truth is that the American wilderness simply erased a man without a trace. There were no dramatic crime scenes and absolutely no extraterrestrial beams of blinding light. The sprawling desert merely kept its heavy silence while holding on to its darkest buried secret. We are left grasping at fading shadows while the undeniable truth completely escapes our reach. The American music machine has always loved a deeply tragic narrative above everything else. A missing or dead artist becomes vastly more profitable than a struggling living one. Jim Sullivan unknowingly bought into this incredibly grim financial reality on that desolate highway. His sudden disappearance ultimately proved to be his most successful and enduring career move. For several decades, the original pressings gathered dust in completely forgotten regional thrift stores. Nobody cared about the bearded man singing sad songs about aliens and lonely highways. The entire country completely ignored his desperate musical cries for attention during his life. Then the modern digital age unexpectedly resurrected his ghostly voice from absolute total oblivion. Boutique independent record labels suddenly discovered this lost desert masterpiece many years later. They cleverly repackaged his profound personal sorrow for a brand new generation of listeners. The obscure album was eventually reissued with gorgeous artwork and very heavy modern marketing. His music finally found the massive national audience he had always desperately craved. Here is where it gets interesting regarding his bizarre posthumous fame. Modern vinyl collectors do not just buy the beautiful melodies and lush string arrangements. They are essentially purchasing a piece of an unsolved and deeply unsettling desert mystery. The unresolved tragedy inherently adds a premium cultural price to every single record sold. Original vintage copies now sell for thousands of American dollars on various online marketplaces. Hipsters in major urban cities proudly display his weary face on their apartment walls. He officially became a beloved indie darling nearly 50 long years entirely too late. His crushing personal failure magically transformed into an incredibly lucrative and trendy modern aesthetic. We must directly confront the brutal overarching irony of this sudden explosive cultural fame. Imagine if Jim had successfully completed that grueling drive to Nashville safely back then. He probably would have just played inside empty dive bars for a few pennies. The relentless American entertainment industry would have chewed him up and spit him out. He would have grown old as a completely forgotten and bitter session studio musician. There would be no massive cult following or expensive boutique vinyl reissues today. The chilling mystery is the only thing currently keeping his artistic name alive. His absolute physical absence created a massive space for endless romantic consumer speculation. Modern consumer culture absolutely devours these tragic Hollywood-style narratives with unapologetic glee. People clearly prefer the beautiful myth of the vanishing genius over mundane, harsh reality. A struggling father failing to pay rent in Los Angeles is rarely considered glamorous. A mysterious man swallowed whole by the dusty desert is infinitely more marketable everywhere. Jim chased the elusive American dream until the desolate landscape literally swallowed him alive. He unknowingly traded his physical existence for a strange and highly profitable eternal relevance. The massive fame he desperately wanted strictly required his ultimate and final personal sacrifice. He successfully became an immortal legend by simply ceasing to be a living man. The ruthless industry finally gave him the gleaming national spotlight he truly always deserved. They only demanded his entire physical life in exchange for this precious cultural recognition. His haunting voice now echoes softly through incredibly expensive urban coffee shops every day. This enduring legacy remains the most darkly cynical punchline in modern pop music history. The world ignored his undeniable talent when he was merely a struggling human being. Society only assigned value to his art once he transformed into a terrifying ghost. He left his physical guitar sitting on that dusty car seat waiting for nobody. He stepped into the silent desert and finally achieved his wildest and grandest dreams. Jim Sullivan never truly found his grand American dream while he was actually breathing. Instead, he simply became a permanent ghostly fixture embedded within the unforgiving Western landscape. The dusty highways eventually claimed the broken man who sang about strange celestial lights. Back inside that dimly lit Brooklyn apartment, the spinning vintage record finally reaches its end. The heavy styler slowly lifts itself off the worn grooves with a soft mechanical click. Suddenly, the cramped urban room is plunged completely back into an absolute heavy silence. It is the exact same eerie quiet that blankets the lonely stretches of Route 66. The haunting mystery of his sudden disappearance remains entirely unsolved after all these long decades. His soulful voice merely echoes through time for a new generation of curious young listeners. His tragic story serves as a deeply chilling reminder of the brutal American music industry. Sometimes the brightest artistic talents are only truly appreciated long after they completely suddenly vanish. The desolate desert kept his physical body, but the world eventually embraced his brilliant mind. Now listen carefully as we turn this ongoing investigation over to our amazing online community. I want to know exactly what you think happened on that fateful quiet desert afternoon. Did he wander away voluntarily, or did something far more sinister find him out there? Drop your best theories down in the comment section below right now for us today. I always read through every single one of your fascinating takes on these cold cases. I truly want to read what you think the cryptic lyrics genuinely meant all along. If you enjoyed unraveling this bizarre musical enigma, hit that specific subscribe button right away. Make sure you also check out our recent investigation into the strange Hollywood hotel vanishings. Until next time, keep spinning those vintage records and deeply questioning the world around you. I have been your dedicated host, tracing the strangest fading echoes of forgotten pop culture. Stay extremely safe out there on those long and lonely midnight highway drives across America. I will absolutely see you guys in the very next thrilling documentary video very soon.